James sat on the old wooden bench outside his small house, staring at the empty street. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. He took a deep breath and looked at the spot where his Harley-Davidson used to be parked. The bike was gone now, sold last week. It was hard to believe it was really gone. James was a black veteran. He had served his country many years ago, riding through deserts and forests on his military bike, protecting his comrades and fighting for peace. The Harley was more than just a motorcycle to him. It was a symbol of freedom, strength, and memories from better days. He had kept it in perfect condition, polished every week, and would ride it through the countryside whenever he could. But now, the Harley was no longer his. He had sold it to pay for the medicine his granddaughter Mia needed. Mia was a bright and cheerful 8-year-old girl with big brown eyes and curly hair. She loved to run and play, just like any other child, but she had a serious illness that made her body weak and tired. The doctors said she needed special medicine that was very expensive. Without it, Mia's condition could get worse, and James couldn't bear the thought of losing her. The decision to sell the Harley was not easy. James had spent many sleepless nights thinking about it. The bike was a part of him. It reminded him of his youth, his battles, and his victories. But nothing was more important than Mia's life. So, with a heavy heart, he found a buyer and handed over the keys. Since then, the street felt different. The loud roar of the Harley's engine was gone, replaced by silence. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now looked at James with quiet sympathy. They knew something was wrong but didn't want to ask. James tried to stay strong for Mia, but sometimes, when he was alone, the loneliness would press down on him. James lived in a small, peaceful neighborhood. The houses were old but well cared for. Children played in the streets during the day, and neighbors greeted each other with warmth. James had lived here for over 20 years, and many people respected him for his service in the military and his kind nature. Every morning, James would wake up early to make breakfast for Mia before she went to school. He made sure she took her medicine on time and helped her with her homework. Mia was his light in the darkness. Her laughter and hugs gave him strength to keep going. One afternoon, James sat at the kitchen table, watching Mia draw pictures with crayons. She was drawing a big, colorful motorcycle. James smiled sadly. "You like motorcycles, don't you?" he asked softly. Mia looked up and nodded. "Yes, Grandpa. When I'm better, I want to ride with you again." James felt a tear run down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly. "We will, Mia. We will." Outside, the wind blew gently, moving the leaves on the trees. James thought about his life, the battles he had fought, the family he loved, and the sacrifices he had made. He had always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. Sometimes, he remembered the nights in the army, sitting by the campfire with his friends, talking about dreams and hopes. Back then, he never imagined that one day he would have to sell his prized Harley to save his granddaughter's life. Life had a way of testing people in unexpected ways. Despite everything, James kept his faith. He believed that good things could still happen. He hoped that his neighbors and community would come together to support Mia and him during this difficult time. He had served his country, now, he needed the strength of the people around him. James looked at the photo on the wall, a picture of him in his military uniform, standing proud and strong. Next to it was a picture of Mia, smiling brightly. Both pictures reminded him of the past and the future. He was determined to protect Mia no matter what. As night fell, James sat on his porch, the cool air wrapping around him. The street lights flickered on one by one. He heard the distant sound of children playing and the soft chatter of neighbors talking. For a moment, the world seemed calm and peaceful. James closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. "Please keep Mia safe. Give me the strength to face whatever comes next." He knew the road ahead would not be easy. But James was a veteran, a man who had faced danger and never gave up. He would fight for his granddaughter with all his heart. The empty spot where the Harley had been was a reminder of loss, but also of hope. Hope that love and sacrifice would lead to better days. And in the stillness of that evening, James held on to that hope like a lifeline. James sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills in front of him. The letters and numbers seemed to blur together. The bills were for Mia's medicine, rent, and other monthly costs. The numbers were growing higher every day. James' heart felt heavy. He had never been good with money, but he always made sure there was enough for Mia. Now, it seemed impossible. Mia's illness was getting worse. The doctors had warned James that if she didn't get her medicine soon, she could become very sick. The medicine was expensive, much more than what James earned from his small pension. He had tried everything to save money, but it was not enough. James looked around the small house. It was filled with memories, photos of Mia, old military medals, and the quiet comfort of home. Then his eyes rested on the Harley's helmet hanging on the wall. It was a simple helmet, but to James, it was part of his past, part of his identity. For weeks, James had thought about selling the Harley. The idea hurt him deeply. The bike was more than just metal and wheels, it was a reminder of who he was. It was the freedom he felt when he rode on open roads, the sound of the engine roaring, the wind on his face. But now, that freedom seemed like a luxury he could no longer afford. One evening, after putting Mia to bed, James sat on the porch and looked at the stars. The quiet night made his thoughts louder. He remembered the promise he made to Mia to keep her safe and healthy. She needed the medicine more than he needed the bike. With a heavy heart, James made his decision. The next morning, he called a local motorcycle dealer who was interested in buying used bikes. They agreed on a price that was fair, but still not enough to cover everything. James knew he would have to find other ways to make ends meet. But the money from the sale would buy Mia's medicine for many months. James took the Harley out of the garage one last time. He polished it carefully, touching every part with care. The bike gleamed in the morning sun, shining like a treasure. He sat on it and felt the familiar weight beneath him. Memories came flooding back, riding with friends, feeling the freedom of the road, the times when the bike helped him forget pain and worry. When the buyer arrived, James handed over the keys with trembling hands. He watched as the new owner rode away, the engine's roar fading into the distance. James felt a deep sadness but also a sense of relief. He had done what was necessary. Back inside, James put the money in an envelope. He took it to the pharmacy the next day and bought Mia's medicine. The pharmacist smiled warmly at James, knowing the struggle behind that purchase. Mia needed this medicine to live, and James was proud that he could provide it. Mia didn't understand why Grandpa's bike was gone. One morning, she asked, "Where is your motorcycle, Grandpa?" James hugged her gently. "I sold it, Mia. To buy your medicine. So you can feel better." Mia looked confused but smiled. "Thank you, Grandpa. I want to get better soon. Then we can ride together again." James smiled back, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. The bike was gone, but Mia's smile made everything worth it. Life after the sale was not easy. James had to cut back on many things. He stopped going out for rides and spent more time at home. He worked small jobs to help pay the bills, even when his body ached from years of hard work. Neighbors noticed the change. Some offered help quietly, bringing food or checking in on James and Mia. The community was small but caring. James felt grateful for their kindness. At night, James often sat by the window, listening to the sounds of the street. Without the Harley's engine, the quiet sometimes felt too loud. But he reminded himself why he made the choice to save Mia's life. One evening, as James prepared Mia's medicine, he heard a strange sound outside. It was the distant roar of motorcycles. Curious, he looked out the window and saw a group of riders approaching the street. Their engines growled like thunder, and the bright headlights lit up the dark road. James felt a mix of surprise and worry. Who were these riders? Why were they coming here? The motorcycles stopped near his house. James stepped outside slowly, heart beating fast. The riders took off their helmets, revealing tough faces with tattoos and leather jackets. They were the Hells Angels, a group known for their wild reputation. James expected them to be angry or threatening. But instead, one of them stepped forward and smiled kindly. "We heard about you, James. About what you did for Mia. We want to help." James was shocked. He had never imagined help coming from a group like them. The riders talked quietly, explaining they wanted to support him and his granddaughter in any way they could. For the first time since selling his Harley, James felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, with help from unexpected friends, he could face the challenges ahead. As the night grew deeper, James invited the riders to stay. Together, they sat under the streetlights, sharing stories of struggle, sacrifice, and courage. James realized that sometimes, family was not just blood, it was the people who stood by you when you needed them most. And in that moment, James knew his fight was not over. It was only just beginning. After the Harley was sold, James felt the change immediately. His street, once filled with the deep, powerful rumble of his motorcycle, had grown quiet. The noise was gone, replaced by a strange stillness that settled over the neighborhood like a soft fog. James sat on his front porch every morning, watching the world go by. The children played outside as usual, their laughter bright and innocent, but the air around James felt heavy. The empty space where the Harley used to be felt like a hole in his life. He missed the feeling of the engine under him, the wind rushing past his face, and the freedom he felt on the open road. More than that, he missed the hope that bike gave him, that symbol of strength and independence. Neighbors noticed James' change too. Mrs. Clark from next door would wave when she saw him, but her eyes looked worried. Mr. Simmons from across the street would stop and talk, but James could see the pity in his gaze. It was as if selling the bike had taken more from James than just metal and wheels. One afternoon, James walked slowly down the street with Mia by his side. She held his hand tightly, her small fingers curling around his rough skin. Mia's bright smile tried to hide her tiredness, but James knew she was feeling weak. "Grandpa," Mia said softly, "do you think I will get better soon?" James looked down at her and smiled. "I believe you will, Mia. You are strong, and we will do everything to help you get better." Mia nodded, her eyes full of trust. That trust was what kept James going. He knew he had to be strong, not just for himself, but for her. As they walked, James noticed some neighbors talking quietly on their porches. He overheard words like "poor James" and "such a sacrifice." The pity hurt, but James understood. People didn't always know what to say when someone was struggling. James also felt lonely. Selling the Harley had changed how he saw himself. He was no longer the man who could take on any challenge alone. Now, he felt fragile, like a part of his spirit was missing. At night, James would sit by the window, staring out at the street. The quiet was louder than ever. Without the bike's roar, the silence seemed to press on him. Sometimes, he wondered if he had made the right choice. But then he would look at Mia sleeping peacefully in her bed and remember why he had done it. Her life was more important than any bike or pride. James thought back to his days in the military. He had faced many dangers and challenges, but this fight was different. It was a fight of patience, hope, and love. He had to be brave in a new way. One evening, a gentle knock came at the door. James opened it to find Mrs. Clark holding a basket of food. "I thought you might need this," she said kindly. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." James thanked her warmly. Moments like this reminded him that even in loneliness, there was kindness. The neighborhood might not say much, but they cared. Mia's health was slowly improving, but the journey was far from over. James spent every day making sure she took her medicine, ate well, and rested. The hospital visits, the phone calls to doctors, and the worry never left him. Despite everything, James found small moments of joy. Mia's laughter when they played board games, her excitement over simple treats, and the way she would curl up beside him at night gave him hope. But the empty spot on the street was a constant reminder. The Harley was gone, and with it, a part of James' freedom and past. The man who had ridden through battlefields now faced a different kind of battle, one in his own home, for the life of his granddaughter. One afternoon, as James repaired a small fence in his yard, he heard the distant sound of motorcycles again. His heart jumped. The noise was loud and powerful, breaking the quiet in a way he hadn't heard since the Harley was sold. He wiped his hands on his pants and walked to the end of the street. A group of motorcycles was coming closer, engines roaring like thunder. The riders wore leather jackets and helmets, their faces serious but calm. James felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. Who were they? Why had they come here? As the motorcycles stopped near his house, James saw the riders take off their helmets. Their faces were strong, marked with years of hard living, but their eyes showed respect. The leader of the group stepped forward and smiled. "James," he said, "we heard about your sacrifice. We want to help." James blinked in surprise. These were the Hells Angels, a group known for being tough and dangerous. But their words were kind. The riders began to help around the neighborhood. They fixed broken fences, cleaned yards, and brought small gifts for the children. They showed respect to James and Mia, treating them like family. Slowly, the street started to feel alive again. The quiet was replaced by the sound of engines, laughter, and hope. James realized that sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places. The lonely street was no longer just his, it was theirs all, a place of new beginnings. James smiled for the first time in a long time. The battle ahead was still hard, but he would not face it alone. The quiet of the evening was broken by the deep, loud sound of motorcycles. James was sitting on his porch, holding Mia close as she played with her small doll. The sound grew louder and louder, filling the street with a powerful roar. James looked up, surprised and a little nervous. A group of motorcycles was coming down the road, their engines thundering like a storm. The riders were dressed in black leather jackets and boots. Their faces were serious, some with tattoos, and their presence filled the neighborhood with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. James didn't recognize the group at first, but then he remembered the stories he had heard, the Hells Angels. They were known to be rough and dangerous. Most people avoided them. But tonight, they were coming to his street. The riders slowed down and stopped right in front of James' house. One by one, they took off their helmets, revealing strong, weathered faces. The leader stepped forward, a tall man with a kind but firm look. "James," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "We heard about what you did for your granddaughter. Selling your Harley for her medicine, that was a real sacrifice." James blinked, unsure what to say. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time. "Thank you," James said quietly. The leader nodded. "We want to help. Not just you, but your family and the neighborhood too." James felt a mix of surprise and relief. He had not expected kindness from the Hells Angels. The riders began to talk with the neighbors, offering to fix broken fences, help with small jobs, and bring food and supplies. The street slowly started to buzz with new energy. People came out of their houses to see what was happening. The fear they once felt toward the group began to change into curiosity and even gratitude. James watched as the riders worked hard, laughing and sharing stories with the children. One of the men brought Mia a small toy motorcycle. Her face lit up with a big smile. "You like this?" the rider asked gently. Mia nodded happily. "Thank you." James felt warmth in his heart. The rough men were showing kindness and care, breaking the neighborhood's quiet sadness. Over the next few days, the Hells Angels stayed nearby, helping wherever they could. They painted the old fence around James' house, fixed the broken streetlights, and cleaned up the park where the children played. James found himself talking with the writers, learning their stories. Many of them were veterans too, with tough pasts and hard lives. They respected James for his service and sacrifice. One evening, as the sun set, James sat around a fire with the writers and neighbors. They shared food and stories, creating a new kind of family. James realized that sometimes, help comes from unexpected places and that kindness can be found even in the roughest faces. Mia played nearby, her laughter mixing with the sounds of the fire and friendly voices. James looked at her and felt hope growing inside him. The neighborhood was changing. What had been a quiet, lonely street was now alive with friendship and support. James knew the road ahead was still difficult, but with new friends by his side, he felt stronger. He thought about the Harley, now gone, and how his life had changed. The bike was a symbol of his past freedom, but this new connection, the unexpected kindness of the Hells Angels, was a symbol of a new beginning. James smiled, ready to face whatever came next, knowing he was not alone. The days passed quietly but with a new energy in the neighborhood. The presence of the Hells Angels had brought change. At first, some neighbors were unsure, watching the tough-looking men with cautious eyes. But as the days went by, the writers showed their kindness in simple but powerful ways. James noticed it all. He saw the way the writers helped fix broken things around the street. They mowed lawns, painted fences, and cleaned the park where children played. They brought food and gifts for families in need. Slowly, the fear and suspicion that had filled the air began to fade. James had never thought he would become friends with the Hells Angels. But these men were different from the stories he had heard. They were respectful, kind, and full of quiet strength. Many of them had served in the military like James, and that connection created a bond. One afternoon, James sat with Marcus, the leader of the writers, on the porch. The sun was warm, and the two men talked quietly. "Why do you help us?" James asked, his voice low but curious. Marcus smiled and looked out at the street. "We know what it means to sacrifice," he said. "Many of us have lost things: family, friends, time. When we heard about you selling your Harley for me as medicine, it touched us. We respect that kind of love and courage." James nodded slowly. "It's not easy. Sometimes I feel like I lost a part of myself." Marcus put a hand on James' shoulder. "You didn't lose who you are. You showed what real strength means." Their conversation was simple but deep. James felt a warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt understood and accepted. Meanwhile, the writers grew close to Mia too. They would play with her in the park, telling stories and making her laugh. One of the men, known as Big Joe, became especially fond of her. He brought her small gifts and always had a kind word. One day, Mia surprised James by asking, "Grandpa, can Big Joe teach me to ride a motorcycle someday?" James smiled. "Maybe one day, Mia. When you're stronger." Mia's health was slowly improving, thanks to the medicine James had bought with the money from the Harley sale. The doctors said she was responding well, and that gave James hope. The fight was not over, but the path seemed brighter. The neighborhood began to feel like a community again. The loneliness that had settled after the Harley was sold was lifting. People smiled more, helped each other, and shared their stories. James watched this change with gratitude. The writers were not just visitors, they were becoming part of the street's story, part of its family. One evening, the writers held a small gathering outside James' house. There was music, food, and laughter. James sat among them, feeling a deep sense of belonging. He thought about how life had brought him here, from a quiet man riding his Harley, to a grandfather fighting for his granddaughter's health, to a man surrounded by new friends who respected and cared for him. The Hells Angels were no longer strangers or scary figures, they were brothers in arms, sharing a bond beyond words. James realized that true brotherhood was not about where someone came from or what they looked like. It was about respect, sacrifice, and standing by each other in hard times. As the night grew darker, James looked up at the stars and whispered a silent thank you for the help, the friendship, and the hope that was now part of his life. He knew there would still be challenges ahead. But with this new family beside him, he was ready to face anything. The quiet street had become a place of healing and strength. And James was proud to be a part of it. The neighborhood was no longer the quiet, lonely place it had been. With the help of the Hells Angels, the street was filled with new life and energy. The once empty spaces were now places of laughter, friendship, and hope. James watched it all with a heart full of gratitude. Every morning, he would see the riders working together with neighbors, fixing fences, planting flowers, and cleaning the park. They brought a sense of unity that the community had not felt in years. People started talking to each other more, sharing stories, and helping one another. James' bond with the riders grew stronger each day. He found comfort in their presence. They reminded him of his army days, brothers standing side by side, ready to face any challenge. One afternoon, James and Marcus, the leader of the riders, sat on the porch watching Mia play with the other children. Mia's laughter filled the air, bright and free. It was a sound James had missed deeply. "Marcus," James said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you all for what you've done. You saved more than just my house, you saved my family." Marcus smiled. "We're glad to help, James. That's what family does." That word, family, felt powerful to James. His family had always been his greatest strength. Now, it was growing beyond blood, a family built on respect, kindness, and loyalty. As the weeks passed, Mia's health continued to improve. The medicine was working, and she had more energy each day. James could see the light returning to her eyes. She began to run and play like other children, filling James' heart with joy. One day, James noticed that the riders had started a small project building a safe playground for the neighborhood kids. They worked with the neighbors, raising money and gathering materials. The project brought the community closer together. James felt proud. The street was healing not just physically, but in spirit too. The riders had shown that strength was not only in power, but in kindness and unity. One evening, as the sun set, James sat with Mia on his lap. She looked up at him with a smile. "Grandpa," she said, "when I'm big, I want to ride a motorcycle with you." James hugged her tightly. "We will, Mia. I promise." The promise gave James new hope. He imagined the day when Mia would be strong enough to ride safely by his side. That day felt like a dream, but one worth fighting for. The riders stayed close, becoming like guardians for the family and the neighborhood. They were there in good times and bad, ready to support and protect. James realized that life was full of surprises. He had sold his Harley to save Mia's life, losing a part of his past. But in return, he had gained something new, a community that cared deeply, and brothers who stood by him no matter what. One night, James sat by the fire with the riders, the flames dancing in their eyes. They shared stories of courage and hardship, of battles fought and won, and of the power of standing together. James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew the fight was not over, but he was no longer alone. The street, once quiet and lonely, was now alive with friendship and strength. And James knew that with this family beside him, anything was possible. The sun rose slowly over the quiet street, casting a soft golden light on the small houses and the freshly painted fences. James stood on his porch, watching Mia play in the yard with her new friends. Her laughter was like music, filling the air with hope and joy. It had been many months since James sold his Harley. The pain of that decision was still there, but it no longer felt like a loss. Instead, it was the beginning of something new, a new life, a new family, and a new purpose. The neighborhood had changed too. Thanks to the kindness and help from the Hells Angels, the street was alive again. The broken fences were fixed, the park was filled with happy children, and neighbors smiled as they passed one another. James thought about how far they had all come. He remembered the difficult days when he felt alone and helpless. The worry for Mia's health had weighed on him heavily. But now, Mia was stronger, healthier, and full of life. Mia ran to James, holding a small helmet in her hands. "Grandpa," she said with excitement, "I want to ride with you now." James smiled and hugged her tightly. "Soon, Mia. Soon." That simple moment filled James with a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, but they would travel it together. The Hells Angels were part of that journey. They were no longer strangers or outsiders. They had become friends, brothers, and protectors. Their rough appearance hid hearts full of kindness and loyalty. James often sat with Marcus and the other riders, sharing stories and memories. They talked about their past, their battles, and their dreams for the future. These conversations gave James strength and reminded him that he was never truly alone. One day, the riders organized a small celebration in the neighborhood. There was food, music, and laughter. Everyone came together to honor the journey they had shared. James stood in the middle of the crowd, looking around at the faces of neighbors and friends. He felt a deep gratitude for the new family he had found. Marcus came up to James and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You showed us what real courage is," he said. "Not just in battle, but in love and sacrifice." James nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "I only did what any grandfather would do." Marcus smiled. "That's why we respect you. You reminded us of what truly matters." As the sun set, James looked up at the sky and made a silent promise. He would continue to fight for Mia, for the neighborhood, and for the new family that had come into his life. The Harley was gone, but James had gained something greater. He had found strength in unity, hope in kindness, and love that would never fade. The street was no longer just a place to live, it was a place to belong. And for James and Mia, this was just the beginning of a beautiful journey.